All right, guys. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks, Jay, for putting this together and giving us the time to talk to you guys. Just want to use this time, obviously, answer as many questions, obviously give us a little background about ourselves and kind of what we do in the space. I've been in the media and marketing space for over 10 years now. Started a marketing agency back in the day with an ex-Facebook employee, and that's really where this kind of concept was born. We got a media company called Tranquilo, and I'll give you guys a little bit of background about what it is, kind of like the business model behind it, monetization, all that. But in that time when I was working with the agency, I really kind of started understanding the landscape of just media, marketing, what brands care about, where are they spending their dollars, how can I monetize a digital product, essentially. I'd started the podcast already at the time, and it was just really more of like a hobby, right? Third generation Hispanic. My grandparents were born in Cuba, came to the States looking for a better life, escaping communism in Cuba at the time, and they built their life down here. And my mom grew up in New York, then came to Miami. I was born and raised in Miami. So Miami's always been my identity of who I am, how I kind of carry myself, represent myself in everything we do. And now with the brand, we're, that's our core. Right? Everything we do is like Miami focused with the goal of expanding more national, but representing Hispanics. And I'll get into a little bit of the rationale behind that. But for me, when I was building this, it was really always like, how do I attach what I believe is my purpose in life and turn it into something that I can amplify through media, right? And podcasts for me at the time, when I started the podcast, I was a consumer of podcasts. I was listening to podcasts, watching podcasts, just where I learned everything, really. And I call YouTube like YouTube University. I didn't go to school for media. I played sports my whole life too, so sports was really all I really knew. I played baseball, and at the time it was really like an identity crisis, I guess, which is really big. What PAC's mission is what's life after sports? And I think a lot of athletes have that question that they ask themselves because you spend so much time devoting to the sport that you don't really know anything outside of sports, right? So for me, that was me. I was, I got out of college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was interning in a strength and conditioning program here in Miami, and I didn't enjoy it. And I was like, I like sports, but I don't like this, right? So I was like, what is it that I do like? So started getting into business, started getting into marketing. That's where the marketing agency world started, grew that up, and then Stay Tranquilo was born in that process. And there's really where I started getting the whole picture, right? It's how do I build a digital product with podcasting, social media, all that, and then how do I build an audience around a product that's going to differentiate itself from the millions of podcasts that are out there now. I think at this point, there's probably close to 4 million podcasts that exist on what they call the RSS feed. So there's a ton of podcasts. I mean, you open social media, it feels like there's a podcast clip of some capacity, right? So for me, it was like, I didn't want to be diluted in that, right? I didn't want to just be another podcast. I didn't just want to be a guy that, hey, like, who the hell is this guy? Like, why am I going to listen to him, right? So I had to be creative and think about how can I create something that I believe in, right? That is close to my purpose and my identity, but also resonate with listeners and something that they care about. And then that's where the whole concept of focusing on Hispanic market came to be. So at the time, when that agency I was working with, all the brands were talking about like, how can I reach the Hispanic market? How can I reach the Hispanic market? How can I reach the Hispanic market? Hispanic market's the largest growing demographic in the United States right now. They have $3.1 trillion of purchasing power. So I saw obviously there's an opportunity there to be like this voice in that space. And I tell you all this because when I was building this, I didn't think about any of those things. It was just like, I'm just going to build a podcast and people are going to listen. But reality is that wasn't the case at all. It was just like, shit, maybe 4 people listened to it. It was probably my mom, my dad, and my brothers, But it's cool to see that evolution over time. And it's been one of those things, you tweak it as you go, you're built, you bring people in to help you out, and you're just kind of evolving the product over time. And I've been doing it now for 5 years, and it started with my phone camera, a USB mic that I plugged into my laptop, and it was just like click record. And there was episodes that I would record with no like producer in the back or anything like that. And I would have a guest there, you know, whoever that might be, and would go after and see the recording and nothing recorded. You know, so like those were a lot of like the pain points like early on in this process where it's like, shit, man, like, you know, I just devoted all this time, all this energy into this, and it's like a waste, you know? So
it's a good conversation though.
Huh? Great. And that was the thing. I'm like, I remember I dabbed up the guest that I had, and I'm like, damn, that was a good combo. And then I hear it after, and I'm like, dude, you're not gonna believe this. We got like 3 minutes of audio from this recording. So, you know, those are some of the growing pains, you know, that happen, and there's a ton more growing pains that come with it. But it's that evolution of like building this from the ground up. It started off just me, and then you know, he kind of came on board, and he's our lead videographer, editor. He's the one that makes everything happen, essentially. But you know, I say that because it really does take a team to build this. And what we're in the works of building now is the Latino Barstool, essentially. So if you guys know Barstool, you know, the Latino Barstool, Barstool Sports, obviously, crazy kind of story. Started off as a Boston brand, was a newspaper, a local newspaper, essentially. And they started evolving that product, and obviously became a big product in the digital landscape, and did things their way, right? Which I always respect that. And you know, Portnoy could be very controversial. He's been in a ton of articles about, you know, who the person he is and all that, and so be it. But he's built something, and the way that whole world worked, where, you know, he got private equity involved, and then, you know, he used that capital to grow it even more, and then sold the company to Penn. Penn bought it for like $500 million. And then he was able to buy the company back for a penny, you know? So it's like just seeing how that whole world worked and really studying that model over the years is where I would say I built the infrastructure for this, of like, okay, they've done a great job of building audience, right? I mean, their social media clips are generating millions of views. Their podcasts are generating another millions of views. And they built a true loyal audience. And I think to build any sort of digital infrastructure, you got to think about audience at the end of the day, because without audience, you're not really building anything. Right? I think if you're going to start a podcast, or if you're going to start a social media channel of some capacity, you got to think about, one, who it is that you are and what's your identity in the brand, but also is like, what in myself can I present to the audience for people to consume and want to listen to me versus another podcast, right? And I think really identifying that early on is only going to get you clearer in your vision as to how you're able to execute it, right? So for us in the beginning, there was no identity, right? But as we built that identity, that's where we really started to see the growth. It was like, all right, who is our audience and how can we tap into this audience? So it's like, hey, if we want to do Hispanic market, what are the things they care about? Who are the people they want to listen to? How do we have to portray the content in a way that's culturally relevant to them? And then from there, just double down on that. And then supplemental to that, it's the consistency, right? I think what you see with a lot of people in podcasts specifically is they'll start a podcast, they'll do 3-4 episodes, see that they got 30 listeners, you know, in the course of 2 months, and they're like, screw this, like, I'm not gonna do this. But that's furthest from the truth. Like, you gotta double down and just continue to go, and put episodes out, and not really be stuck so much on the numbers, right? But just say, hey, I believe in this product. I believe on the why of why I'm doing this, and just continue to put the content out. And now at this point, you know, we've evolved. You know, it's from a podcast now to a media network like a Barstool, where we have 6 different podcasts that we produce. We do stuff in the golf space. We do stuff in travel, wellness, sports and entertainment, and then like food and beverage, hospitality world. So, and the reason behind that is like, okay, let me see what the insights show and what the numbers and the metrics show is like, what does Hispanic audiences care about? Where are they spending their money? What are the things that they're consuming? And just building content around the things that, one, attach to our brand and stay tranquilo and identify with our brand, but also resonate with the audience that we want to reach. And for us, I was like picking and choosing, okay, hey, sports is a monster, right? Like, we'd be doing ourselves a disservice to not do something in the sports space. Obviously, sports media in general is huge. So if we could tap into that audience, that will be a huge avenue for us, right? Now, what's the next thing? Food and beverage, music, huge avenue there. Let's create content in that space, right? So we started just picking and choosing what were the pieces of content that people like, building audience from their interest, and then, hey, I like sports, but I also like business, right? So I might listen to the sports show, but guess what? Now I'm going to go and listen to that business conversation that they have on the network. So we've been able to pull audience from different levels of interest, but now they're consuming a variety of different segments that we essentially produce. So we have a working relationship with the PGA Tour. So we go to PGA Tour events. We do player interviews. So we're interviewing PGA Tour players. We're doing coverage on the tournaments themselves. We're sitting in press conferences. They have, probably between Live and PGA Tour right now, and not including Tour America, is Corn Ferry Tour, which is like the minor leagues essentially for the PGA. They have hundreds of tour players that are Hispanic. So I was like, no one's talking about them. So how can we amplify their voice and then bring audience based off, hey, I'm Colombian. This guy's Colombian too. Let me listen to him and see what he has to say. I know him, but no one's really talking about him, right? So just finding a different angle, right? It's like we're not doing anything different than maybe what's out there, but we're adding our own flavor. We're adding our own kind of takes to it. And that's how we're able to build audience through that. And then it's just things start to grow. I mean, we started a podcast with Javon Holland and Cameron Wolf from NFL Network called Breaking House Rules. And that was just another outlet that we were able to build audience from. And something cool that came out of that, right? Javon was with Miami for the last 4 years, but now he's with the Giants, right? And the transition that we were able to see, yeah, sucks. I hate it, but it is what it is. But something interesting that came out of that, right? Moment he goes to Giants, all of a sudden, huge New York audience influx, right? So it's the power of also like your content, but it's also the guests that you bring on, because we've built, I would say, from the audience that we've built, probably 60-70% is just from the guests that we have come on, because they share the clip, they post it on their socials, they might collab with the post, right? And then all of a sudden they're seeing and they're like, oh shoot, who are these guys? What is this podcast? And then they start seeing a couple different clips. Hey, they had this guy on, they had this guy on. And then from there, you're getting audience from all these different angles. And then from there, it just starts accumulating over time. And that's really been our recipe. It's been very organic, very authentic. And I think that's really true to who we are. We don't try to change anything just because somebody else is doing it. We believe in what we're doing. We're always tweaking it as we go. But at the end of the day, reality is like we want to stay true who we are. And if you like us, great. If you don't, then you move on to the next. So I think it's really obviously audience and just really being authentic to who you are, and then always keeping the why behind why you're doing it, because that's what's gonna keep you going when things may not be working out, or things may not pan out the way that you thought that they were going to be, or the growth isn't where you thought it would be. It's like, well, at the end of the day, I know why I'm doing this, so I'm just going to continue to do it, right? And we've seen great results over the last couple of years, and the team continues to grow. And it's a never-ending battle of like, what do we do next? How do we continue to grow these things? What can we do different? What can we do better? And it's having a lot of those internal conversations. But that's a rundown about the business. That's a rundown on myself. I'll stop and ask if you guys have any questions. But I want to get in also to like the day-to-day of like, how do you monetize this, and kind of what that structure looks like as well, because it is an important piece of it, because at the end of the day, if you're not making money from it, then yeah, you got to figure it out.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, how do you break through when you talk about the 4 million numbers on the RSS?
Yeah,
that's a lot.
Yeah.
And I know I've been hesitant, and I'm just starting, and I'm going. This feels like I'm coming to the party late. You know what I mean? Like, where do you start? You don't even know who to talk to.
Yeah. So I'll say this, right? So you have 4 million podcasts that exist on the feed. Out of that 4 million podcasts, there's probably maybe, I don't know what the number is, but maybe 50% that are even active at this point, right? So right there, you've just shrunk that in half, essentially, right? So your competition just shrunk because that person just decided to create a podcast but is not doing it anymore. So I would say first order is just not only starting it, but making sure that out of the 4 million, you're not the one that quits early in the game, right? So right there alone, you've cut half of that equation out, right? And then let's say out of the 4 million, 2 million are extremely active, or at least posting relatively regularly. Now it's really saying, okay, well, what are they doing that's working? What are they doing that's not working? And what can I do to implement the things that they are working, and make sure that I watch the mistakes of other people and make sure that I don't make those same mistakes. At the end of the day, I would say the biggest thing is like, obviously you got to leverage social media, right? Like that's the biggest thing. Just posting regularly on Instagram, TikTok, etc., because that's where all the eyeballs are in terms of consumers, and then really leveraging your personal network to bring in the right type of guests. And then from there, it's like, I guess my question to you would be like, what's the basis of your podcast? Like, what are the types of conversations that you're having?
Interviewing Africans who are in America who are doing really well in business, sports, and entertainment, and just kind of really focusing in on that group. I had another question for you though. Why is, and I'm a traditional TV guy, why is podcasts, like, why is it popping, or why is it important? Why do people go to podcasts versus other methods?
Yeah, I would say one is accessibility, right? I think nowadays you can open up Spotify, YouTube, Apple, right? Google. There's so many products now that have invested time and energy into it. I look at it as like modern day radio, essentially. Before you would tune into 560 or whatever and listen to whatever radio show that you wanted to listen to. But now it's like I know a podcast is coming out this Tuesday of a podcast that I like, but I might not be able to get to it, so I can listen to 15 minutes now in the car, then I can listen to the other 15 minutes when I'm at home working or at the gym, whatever it may be. I think it's just the accessibility that has opened the door for podcasts. And the biggest distributors of the podcast world, right? YouTube, Spotify, those are the top two. They've invested a lot of money into podcasts and creating a platform of accessibility for hosts, right? So like people like ourselves that are putting podcasts out there, they're creating it very easy for us to upload podcasts, right? So we use one called Anchor, right? And Anchor allows you to basically upload the file on there as an MP4 file, and then it'll distribute to all platforms. So I get the file, upload it to Anchor, put our captions, title of the episode, whatever keywords we want to put in there, and then from there, boom, automatically distributes everywhere. So it's also made it very easy for hosts, or creators to be able to go out there and say, hey, I want to do this, but it's like, it's intimidating, or I don't know how to do this. Now they've made it really easy for us. Whereas before you had to reach out to a radio network or reach out to a TV network, kind of pitch them a concept and say, hey, I'm dependent on you now to make sure that this even gets aired, right? Where now we don't have to depend on anyone. We can all do it ourselves, which I think that is where podcasts really started to take off. Is just accessibility for both the consumer side, but also for us as the creators to be able to just put podcasts out every day if we wanted to, right? And if I want to cut up a clip of a podcast that I recorded 2 years ago and say, hey, that was a really relevant conversation then, but it's even more relevant now. Let's cut up a 15 snippet clip from that podcast and drop it as another episode for this week, or supplement whatever the episode is that we dropped that week. So I think accessibility has also been a huge thing that has grown, and just the investment that these companies have made into pushing podcasts more.
I have two questions just about your process.
Yes.
One is, especially when you first started, how did you get guests to come on and say yes?
Right.
And was that intimidating for you at all? Sometimes we feel like we got to pay people to do things. Was that a part of your process? And then the second is, now that you're in this, and I know you have a team, but what does your scheduling process look like for podcasting? I find that to be the most difficult. It's like, do I sit in one time and record for an hour, and then now I can bring that up and say, or like, what does that process look like, and what have you found works for you?
Yeah. So to answer the second question first, I wouldn't say there's a super streamlined approach for us with that. I mean, it's really been one of those things. Sometimes it's 2 days before, and we'll make it happen. We are very, very nimble in our approach, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, honest, like I always have our stuff in the car, so like we can go somewhere and you can be like, hey, like we gotta go right now. It's like, all right, like let's go. I'll meet you at the studio.
And it's
so,
like
it's very like we're very mobile. So like all these lights, this is our setup. So like it's always in my car. It's always on me because you never know when someone important is gonna be having for a conversation. Like you don't want to waste an opportunity. So it's like, hey, let's go. So like, if you have to go to your house, you have to go to a restaurant, like give me 30 minutes to set up, and like we'll set up a record, and we'll be having a podcast done in an hour.
And and there's times where you schedule a time with the guests, and then all of a sudden they can't make it, right? So those things do happen a lot. And I will say one thing that we didn't do for a while was the virtual podcast. Like everything was like this, lights, cameras, all that. Just because I think there's just a little bit more of a better feel just doing it in person. But at the end of the day, if like the conversation's really good and you have to shift whatever the approach was originally, go out there and just do it virtually because it might make it happen. And then if you don't do it that way, then it may never happen, right? So we've been a little bit more flexible in that approach where we'll do more virtual recordings. And we do have like a pipeline, right? So I say, hey, these are 20 dream guests that we would like to have that we feel we have access to. Let's start the outreach now. So maybe we could schedule it a month from now or 2 months from now and at least just start getting the conversation. I think really what helps with that is just really, really always reaching out to people and saying, hey, we want to do a podcast with you. Are you open to it? And if they say yes, now it's like, all right, when works for you? How can we coordinate that? And then from there, just start building that up from there. It is tough to, especially depending on cadence, right? Like if you want to do a podcast every week, getting a guest every single week might be tough. So you could do something where, hey, we're going to sit for 2 hours and we're going to knock out 4 episodes, right? I've done that in the past. What I don't love about that is by episode 2, and you could talk about it after, like what you did today, right? You're gassed after that. And I never want the product of the quality to suffer because I just sat for 3 hours talking and now all of a sudden my voice doesn't work as well. My mind is mush. I can only think about.
Right?
You're right.
You get what?
I did 5 today.
Yeah.
I was gassed.
Yeah.
But that's hard too, right? Because you're not going to publish or like you're not going to broadcast them all at the same time. So I feel like, in my experience, it's a little tough to do that with more than like let's say 2 because like let's say you do 4 back to back, and even if you're going to put out 1 a week, right? By the time you've gotten to the guest, unless you are like really preemptive with like planning and being like, okay, I'm getting him the week before Super Bowl, so we're going to be like, da, da, da. The current event time has passed. So like now you're talking about something that happened 4 weeks ago. So the perspective of your listener has shifted because like it already happened. So if you cram like too many,
It's true.
I feel like then you lose the momentum of like the environmental time piece of it, which makes it hard.
100%.
But have you found that with your, to back up to the one where you said about sometimes you'll go virtual, and maybe this is only for like, I don't know, like for me, right? So I wouldn't call myself a podcast listener, but there are podcasts that I listen to. And majority of the time I never get to watch them. I'm listening to them, like you said, on Spotify.
Right.
So at that point, this part is less of the important part because like they were looking at each other, right? Even if it was virtual. So, but I'm not seeing what happened because I'm listening to it in the car. So maybe I might catch the clip of what happened, but for the majority of it. So have you found that like that does play a factor too, where like listening wise, if people are going to listen on the go, then you're not as concerned about the visual appeal?
Yes, I will say that knowing the fact that someone can listen to the audio version will maybe not make the visual component extremely important if you just really believe in what the dialogue is and what the conversation or topic is about, and you really want to get that out like that week because of relevance, right? So there is that component, but at the end of the day, I think there is an importance to video, right? So if you could prioritize video, great. If you can, it's not the end of the world, but I do think just if you look at the nature of podcasts now, right? YouTube is a huge place for podcast consumption, so that means people are watching, right? And Spotify, if you look at the way they built their platform essentially for podcasts, you can watch a podcast on Spotify now, and they invested a lot of money, and their algorithm is actually rewarding creators for people that are uploading in video formats, right? So there's I guess like 2 sides to it, right? It's like, yes, if the conversation's so good, value that more than anything, because at the end of the day, you can make the set look great and everyone looks good on camera, but at the end of the day, if the conversation is not valuable or entertaining at any capacity, then really the video doesn't mean much of anything, right? So obviously the audio component is priority because of the fact that you can access it from anywhere, but I would say the emphasis around video is just as important because of how much
They can add something.
people,
I feel like, I'm sorry to cut you off. So you saying that is more so because I'm curious, trying to get into the space as well. How many of those podcasts do you listen to audio that you haven't seen through video?
I'm an avid consumer of the New Heights podcast every single week. I almost never watch the video. Because
How did you get introduced? Did you see a
so I
short,
think
a
I maybe
clip,
saw a
or-
clip, let's say, so I saw like the 15-second recap, and it was, you know, fun and entertaining. And I'll still see them sometimes, like I follow them on social, so it might come through the timeline, but like, I spend so much time in the car, let's say, or working where I can listen to it, where I have to be doing something else, and I can't do that. Now, if something's really funny, and I know that someone made a face or a joke or whatever, I'll go back and look it up. But 9 times out of 10, I'm just listening to it.
But there's a visual hook that captures you to watch
Right.
this.
Correct, but see, and that's what I was asking about, like, once you've reached a certain point of like, it's almost like once you've got the buy-in, then you don't need it anymore. I'm not saying they should not do video anymore, because like, there's a huge piece to that.
Right.
But I'm just saying, as a consumer, once I'm already sold, like, now I don't need the video.
For
So
sure.
I'm like, I know what they look like, I know what's
Do you
happening.
need water or beer?
Water, beer.
Water, beer.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that. I remember when the Cat William thing exploded,
Right,
and it was everywhere.
Yes.
It was the only thing that got me to watch it, but ultimately, I didn't watch everything. I got to the parts where
To listen.
it was explosive just to see
Right.
it. But ultimately, I had to, because it was so long, I had to listen to the audio version.
yes,
Let me ask you, so
Yeah.
in terms of like,
that's
because you can tell through the
Right.
analytics, right? Like the engagement throughout the course of the podcast.
Yep.
Like, do you find that you have a large percentage of listeners truly listening all the way through? Are they clicking into certain, parts that
Yeah.
they find?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we monitor the analytics religiously, and I think that helps inform a lot of the decisions that we make in terms of like what should we be doing next, or what should we focus on a piece of content wise. And I think that's for both sides, right? It's the long form actual podcasts themselves, but also like the social media clips that we put out there, right? It's like what performs really well on Instagram that we can then cut up from another podcast that kind of replicates that same format, right? Or editing style, whatever that may be. So the analytics are extremely important because you want to see how engaged obviously your audience is, but it's also seeing how much are they even paying attention to, right? Because you're making so much time and investment into building this, and if they're not watching or consuming it, then it might not be worth, might not be worth it.
Have you found a pocket of
So it's going back to kind of like essentially the point of the visuals.
The visual.
So like, I come from a broadcast world. So like you kind of talking about when you're in TV, I come from a broadcast world where everything there is pretty much visual. But I think like when it comes to a podcast, I think like the visual aspect has kind of like a psychological effect because you can kind of match the person that you're talking to.
Yeah.
And especially with our people and a lot of people we've had, when we get into those conversations that has like some more meaning, like seeing the person talking about it and like describing that life. And I feel like for us, like while we do have audio offerings, I feel like our podcasts almost are meant to be digested visually because of the way that the conversations are held. Because it's not scripted, it's just wherever this conversation goes, it goes.
Yeah.
And sometimes it'll take you somewhere. Like some people just for some reason decide to open up to us about all their life, and like hearing it and like seeing it can be two different animals. And then obviously when it comes to social media clips, that's usually why people even decide to listen to a podcast. And you're talking about Cat Williams, like you can hear him exploding, but seeing him explode on camera, it adds just like a different level of emphasis. And like for me personally, like there's times where like maybe I can't watch a full podcast, but I'll listen to where I can, and then I'll go back to watching
Right,
it.
exactly.
So like the audio is almost like a buffer. So when you can't watch it, you listen to the small portion, then you go back.
Sure.
So you listen, and then you watch it as well.
We talked about listening, right? So we talked about like global listening and us, and like if you can't see the body language, it's definitely different. And so like you said, broadcast. I also came from broadcast and worked on doing guests for like Charles Barkley's podcast, right? The Steam Room. Typically, they're very low key. Like they're just sitting there. There's not anything exciting. No one's hooping and hollering. But like the one time that you're gonna get it, every 4 podcasts or 5 podcasts, it's like, damn, I'm so glad we had the video. Because you want that element. Like you said, it's almost like psychological.
Yeah.
How do you monetize this?
Yeah, so I was definitely going to get into that. So majority of it is through sponsorship and advertising revenue. So how you've seen pretty much any podcast, there might be an in-stream ad that's placed in there, or there might be product placement in the back in the visual, which kind of going back to the visual, it's an added value that you could provide for a brand, right? So whether that's merch or that's a water bottle.
That's what I'm saying. Like
Right,
you're gonna have your smart water sitting there while you're talking, drinking. You're paying for
This
it.
may be a dumb question. How is that arranged?
As far as what sponsorships and advertising within the podcast. So it's at the discretion of how the brand sees themselves working with you, right? A lot of the times when we're pitching the brands, we're actually kind of coming up with the creative concepts to them, right? And I think that's a big value point that we bring to the brands as well, right? It's just like, hey, it's just a podcast, but we're also thinking creatively about how we can immerse your brand or your product into the content, right? So that might be a special segment within the show that, you know, hey, this segment is brought to you by Yeti, right? And then that segment now is owned by Yeti, that we creatively thought about a way that is engaging with the audience, that then now we plug in the brand there.
Would you ever say no? Let's just say, I don't know why fentanyl came to my mind, but something that you just wouldn't, like you wouldn't, I don't know why.
You wouldn't support.
Something controversial,
Something
basically.
controversial.
Yeah, I get where you're going.
Something controversial where you go and they say, hey, we'll give you 2x of what anybody else is giving you.
Yeah.
I don't do drugs.
What's going on over here?
Not yet,
You wanna talk
yeah. I don't do
Our turn.
I have a question.
Well, let me just answer his question really quick. But I would say you have to be aware of like the people you're working with, right? Because it is a representation of you as well, right? So if you're representing something that you don't believe in, then I also don't think you can actually push that product in a meaningful way, right? They might throw a crazy dollar amount at you, and then you're gonna be like, you know, it's gonna make you think. But then it's like, who are you to be pushing, you know, fentanyl, for example, right? Or Viagra, and I don't believe in the product or whatever it may be. Then it's gonna be hard for me to push it, right? But then again, right? If it's kind of like in that middle ground, I think what's cool about us too is like we have so many different products to offer that maybe myself doesn't believe in that, but hey, there's someone that may fit that product more than I do, right? And it's still not that controversial where they might be a perfect person to represent that product or that brand. But you do have to sometimes say no because it just doesn't fit your brand identity and who you are and what you believe in. And I think it'll come off authentically too if you don't believe in something and then you're promoting it, because then they'll be like, well, this kind of looks like.
Are you soliciting it, or is it like a firm, or is it a network? Like, what's
As far as facilitating the deals, right now it's all internally. So I come from that media ad sales background, so I'm doing a lot of the selling. We actually just hired someone to now internally lead the ad sales world.
Like if somebody else is, obviously they're gonna take a cut of that, right?
Right.
That can be pretty large.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so when you're doing that internally, like you make some more navigating the.
Like the ad sales, sponsorship side. Yeah, so I've been the one that's really been kind of the broker of these deals, right? So reaching out via LinkedIn, you know, a lot of networking events, going out there. I would say if you're not on LinkedIn, get on it like yesterday, you know? I started really leveraging LinkedIn about a year ago, posting our clips on there. So I'll get one of our podcast clips, post it on there, put a caption in a little bit of a strategic way, have kind of a different call to action on it than maybe how we post it on Instagram, but leveraging all this content that we're producing and putting it onto LinkedIn, right? So that's one facet. And then just showcasing like what we're doing, right? Showcasing that we're credible in the marketplace, that we're at this event, we're connecting with this person, we're connecting with that person, showcasing that we're industry experts in the Hispanic space, because like that's our angle, and brands want to see that, oh man, this guy knows something about media.
So there would be like quote unquote business cuts, right? Like you wouldn't put like, let's say you had somebody and they had like making some joke about it.
Right, exactly.
You would just take something, but if somebody said something that was business savvy, made sense, you would take that clip and post it for LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it has to be specifically business savvy. I think it's just like, hey, this is organically who we are, right? And this is some of the conversations that we're having, and put that as a clip on there. And then, you know, I think where you can get maybe a little bit more strategic about making it a little bit more businessy is through the caption on LinkedIn.
But LinkedIn, you heard me bring it up earlier today in that one session. LinkedIn, I mean, 2U is the largest advertiser on planet Earth on LinkedIn, believe it or not. We're number one. So like, LinkedIn has really over the years gone way beyond just the virtual resume. The content that's
Also,
Absolutely.
also all those brand
Your
deals
podcast.
on here, so, especially for your about your Latino market. So with what you put out, with your content and promoting the Latino market, do you strategically partner with brands that also represent that? And the reason why I ask that is because not only are you taking a look at those companies on LinkedIn, right? Like the head of marketing for XYZ product that's Latino owned, right? And they would partner with you, that person's on there, so there's a way to connect that way. I'm just thinking like, cause he brought it up, right, about the very specific nature of his podcast. So like, you think of how many people are Africans living here that are doing well, that own products, that have money to spend for advertising.
Exactly.
So like, those people are on LinkedIn, and therefore you can do brand partner deals. Is that a brand partner deal that you focus on, is doing some of that marketing with specifically like Latinx brands or like Latino brands?
I think that's definitely an angle to attack it, right? Like for you with the Afro community, right? It's saying, hey, what brands are paying attention to that, right? What brands are saying, hey, we need to spend marketing dollars towards this community. But they're not going to just do it with like a general market campaign. They're going to do it with someone with you, because you're speaking to that audience. You're having guests on that resonate with that audience. So they're going to look at you as an outlet or a vehicle to reach them in a relevant way, because the media landscape and advertising landscape for the last 20, 30 years was just like, hey, I'm going to put an ad out there and that's it, right? But now if I want to speak to a specific demographic, I got to speak to them in the right way, right? I can't just put something out there that's generic. I got to bring in a personality or a talent that resonates with that audience. I mean, you see, like, for example, what Bad Bunny has done in the last 6 months. Every brand is knocking on his door because they know, hey, he's got a massive audience and he resonates with the Latino space, so I'm going to reach out to him to be the face of this campaign, right? So it's the same thing with any market, I would say. And they don't have to be Latinx or Afro-owned businesses, right? They just have to be brands that want to reach that market, but they want to reach them in a relevant way, so they're going to look for vehicles like yourself to be that opportunity to do it. And I think that's where, when you make that connection with like a CMO, right? Say, hey, I saw that you guys are really trying to focus on the Afro community. This is a little bit about us. We're interviewing different industry experts that are Afro, and we're having these type of conversations. Here's example of some of our work. And then from there, you kind of pitch them an idea as to how their brands can be positioned within your content. And a lot of times, internally, they're not really having these conversations, but then all of a sudden you present them an idea and they're like, shoot, that's a good idea. We should do something like this. And that's how we've been able to sell it in, right? Because we're not at the Barstool level, right? So a lot of the times Barstool's just getting brands knocking on their door, right? So for us, it's how do we get strategic about thinking of how we can connect with this brand and then find a way to position them in a meaningful way. And I'll give you an example. Yeti, we just signed Yeti to a sponsorship a couple months ago. And that was like a huge kind of deal. And organic as hell, right? I use the crap out of Yeti products. Like I'm huge, like my Yeti and tumbler in my hand at all times. It's in my car and it's on the podcast set and I'm drinking. Here, put this one on. I got you. Yeah, I have something like that. Yeah. So it all kind of started like that. I put our Stay Tranquilo logo on a Yeti, and I just was drinking my water on a podcast like all the time. And then I connected with their head of e-commerce at Yeti, and he just kind of saw our content on LinkedIn, posting it all the time, and he just became a fan of the content, saw what we were doing in the golf space, saw all this awesome content we were creating, and then out of the blue, like literally out of nowhere, get a message from him saying, hey, you guys are doing some awesome stuff. I want to connect you with my head of sports marketing because we want to get into the golf space. And they're a big outdoor brand. They've been camping, fishing, but they're like, we need to become more of like this lifestyle brand. And you're focused on Hispanic market. We're not doing a lot in that space, so there's an opportunity there. And connected with their head of sports marketing, kind of gave them a rundown of what we do, and that was it. And that came through just being active on LinkedIn, doing outreach on LinkedIn as well, and just connecting the dots of like, hey, these are the potential brands that may want to partner with us. And if you like us, great. If you don't, all good too. But at the end of the day, I saw a connection point there, and I realized, hey, if there's an opportunity, they'll see what we're doing. Yeah, well, for the example with Yeti, it was, hey, this is what we do. Gave them a rundown of our conversation, But the working really just came through. He consistently saw what we were doing out there, saw that we were passionate about the product already as well. He's like, hey, these are not some random guys just hitting us up trying to get, $1 out of us. Like, they believe in the product as well. And from there, that's where I think organically it just kind of happened. And I think that's what, brands want to see. They want to see organic content, but authentic in your approach as well. And then from there, it's like, all right, how do you tie it all together and say, hey, this is how we envision your product in our content.
I have a question for you as far as you're negotiating the deals. In the event space,
Yeah.
we might create tiers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you have that same thing?
Yes.
Like, this is going to cost you this, and it's just...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a variety of different ways I think you could position sponsorships and content opportunities with the brands. One is just kind of like a segment inclusion. So, it's a 40-minute conversation. We'll put a segment in there, custom segment for you, and it'll be branded you. And then from there, we can cut that into a social media clip, and that goes out every so often on social media. You can have a title sponsor of the episode. You could sell in an episode itself, saying, hey, we're getting in this really awesome guest. Do you guys want to sponsor this specific episode? So there's definitely a bunch of different ways to do it. And then we get also creative knowing like, hey, podcasts are tough maybe to monetize, but we're super active on social media, so we can create something custom social content,
branded content.
and do more branded content stuff.
Yeah,
Yes.
we have a deck.
Yeah, I have my deck.
Social is pretty critical.
Yeah, socials. I mean, pretty much everyone needs to get on socials in some capacity, whether it's through a reel or it's through some sort of branded content.
Yeah.
So any time a brand comes, whether it's just a podcast and inclusion, or sometimes like, hey, we want you to come in and help us revitalize our social media with what you guys do in branding content.
And
So there's a lot of different
I feel like I'm
avenues.
asking too many questions.
No, keep asking.
So, how much of it, did you have a chicken and egg problem where, just think about it, the path.
Yeah.
I think this needs to be a long-term, meaningful part of what we do. And, in the beginning, you're not getting Yeti.
Right, absolutely not.
So,
That's the guest thing. Like, I think that's
see where I'm going.
right?
So, I'm thinking about you right now, like, burning 5 of them.
Yes,
while
so
you're
a little
eating.
bit.
Maybe it depends on how you set it up though, right? Because if you put in the time and effort to create a storytelling, you have
Exactly.
identified the brand. For instance, with Pack, you can say, hey, look, we can offer you exposure to this many people in these places. Maybe off the jump, you could get it funded, no?
Well,
Exactly.
we had a box deal, we killed it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Wow.
the CEO's a really good friend of mine, so don't tell me so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It just,
bless you.
It wasn't the right format and structure for our men, right?
Yeah, it
Because
was
at the end
for
of
the
the
player, it was
day,
for you guys.
yeah,
It
at
wasn't
the end
for
of the
Pat.
day, it was to give players an opportunity to get distribution, right?
and that's, they have a meaningful distribution there.
Absolutely.
Here, Swisher and Scott Galloway, and blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
But,
Talk a little bit though, because from a beginner's mindset,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What was the
that's-
tipping
that's what-
point for you
That's
to
what I was
have
trying to
something
ask.
sellable?
And then where did you start? Because again, it's a lot of these, and some are well established, others are just starting, right? Some have just started, right? What was the moment where you're like, okay, now we have something we can sell?
Right.
Very-
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because even to this point, I think there's a struggle on the fact, like, do we still have something sellable, right? I mean, we want to reach the biggest brands in the world, but we know there's hurdles that come with that, right? And I wouldn't say there was like an exact moment, right? I think as we started to see obviously numbers go up and metrics go up and the analytics showcase like, hey, we have something tangible. Then it was like, okay, how do we want to go to these brands and kind of speak to them in a way that we can actually try to close deals? But really in the beginning, I was always just thinking like, okay, we're doing something unique and different, right? So that gives us like kind of an angle that's maybe different than another podcast might be reaching out to them about just saying, hey, here's our podcast, can you sponsor on there? It's like, hey, here's our podcast, and because we're going after the Hispanic market, you're not doing anything in that space.
You could hook.
We have, and that's been our best selling point. It's like,
But I think that's a good hook.
and exactly, it's the same exact angle. Yeah, same exact angle. It's like, and that's why I kind of led with like the whole audience thing, right? It's like figure out who that audience is, because the audience is going to be your angle to be able to sell in and monetize this, because it's so saturated now that you can't just say you have a podcast and, hey, these are my numbers. It's like, hey, this is my podcast, this is my audience, and this is what you can reach because of this, right? Is it younger? Is it older? Is it Afro? Is it Hispanic? Is it white, right? Whatever that angle may be, like, use that to your advantage, because brands are trying to find ways to get creative on how to reach specific people. It's not just like, boom, here you go, right? Unless you're Joe Rogan or you're, New Heights, right? That they have these massive audiences. Now it's like, you got to think creatively and strategically, okay, well, what's our angle, right? And for you, it's Afro. For, me, it's Hispanic. But everyone's got to just find that, I think, that angle, and that's going to help you at least have some leverage, especially while it's early and you're still building out audience at the end of the day. Because what's going to happen is, like, you build a massive audience, then brands are going to see you and you're so relevant on social media. They have teams looking for these products all the time. But if you're not in that, then it's like, okay, now how do we figure out a way to get into these budgets that they might have for podcasts or budgets for specific demographics? And that's where I think we found our kind of tipping point, was just like, I'm just going to let you know who our audience is and what our product is. And if you could buy into something now, maybe you can grow with us, right? And it's funny, I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and I forget what podcast they had brought up, but they were having a conversation with a small podcast at the time, and it's I think like a top 50 podcast. I don't remember the name of it now. But he was talking about them about doing some sort of advertising within their podcast, and he didn't do it at the time because they were too small. And he's like, shit, if I would have just done it with them from the beginning, imagine all the exposure that I would have gone with it. So you could sell in the fact like, hey, we're building something meaningful, and we're not going anywhere. So if you ride with us early and it can just pay the bills, essentially, maybe help you hire a videographer, help you, bring in a couple extra resources to invest into the business still, then, hey, now you have someone that's believed in you in the beginning, essentially, and just bought into the idea that you pitch them, and now they grow with you. It's like, damn, now they're growing with you, your scope with them is probably going to grow, so you're going to maybe get a bigger paycheck with them because their business is growing, your audience is growing, so they can justify spending more.
Does it always work that way? Because sometimes, they can be very opportunistic and go, hey, we blew up. Like, I did this thing with Hot Chip Challenge, and it's a little different, but I mean, it just went everywhere. And when we came back,
Right, that was so good.
It was so good. The Pocky One Chip thing.
Yeah.
And oh man, it almost killed me. I almost died. And it went dumb viral. And when we came back to them, they were like, yeah, no, we good. We sent you another one. I'm like, you're nuts.
Yeah.
But, so sometimes they won't ride with you because they
100%.
got what we needed and it came in at a low entry. So we're good. So like,
How you would put that in the agreement, right? Like if
It wasn't though then. It was so early. They did it as like a joke, like a thing that was going around.
Right.
It just was when he did it, it went viral, so it became like a thing. So it was there was no agreement. It was like it just happened.
it just happened, but then when you try to come,
You're funny enough that like, that'll happen again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was going to say,
I'm talking about the business side. The
Yeah.
business side of it, because when we came back to them and said, hey, we wanted to do something else with them, they were like,
They were the right fit then.
Yeah.
Because I think someone who's really interested will, and like going back to like the beginner, you asked about like beginner's mindset when you just started. Can you speak to, because I've been in talent looking for a long time. Do you agree, do not pay guests for podcasts?
never
Okay.
pay guests in my
Do
life.
not pay guests for, I'm not kidding. So,
That's what
we won't name names, but I know,
Hold on, time out. Why?
because if you're doing, first of all, if you're, in my opinion, and please speak to this, because I'm not an expert, but when you book talent for TV and stuff, a lot of times you pay. But when you do podcasts, it's a different environment. And going back to what you said originally, which is like sort of what's your why, what's your audience, who are you speaking to, like, and I don't remember if it was Chip that said this yesterday or somebody else, but they were like, if money is even though you're trying to monetize something, if money is the go-to, then you're doing it for the wrong reason.
Right.
What do you mean?
So, like somebody yesterday was saying, like if money is your driver, it was you, right? It wasn't you who said that. Okay, my apologies. But it was, right, it's not sustainable. If money is your end goal, then you're not in it for the right reason. So and of course today we talked about money being a tool and money being.
No, but why don't you pay
Okay, because you're building something off of this organic space. Now, it's just like this understood thing where you don't pay podcast guests. You're getting a lot of accolade off of it. Things may go viral. That guest may have been so great that people are gonna reach out to them to say, hey, I wanna do this. But like, it is pretty much a thing, even in the biggest top 50 podcasts right now, you don't pay your podcast guests. When podcasts get big enough and they have staff and you have a talent booker that you pay to go get your guests, to your point, about how do you start though in beginner mindset. So my podcast did not go anywhere. It's taking a break right now while we revamp. But like your personal relationships and then the people of your personal relationships are who you go to. I have Nate Burleson on my podcast.
Yeah.
Ain't nobody know who I am. People dang sure know who Akbar and Nate are, and they're paying them to do a lot bigger things.
You don't need to pay.
But on you don't, right, so you don't,
You should have every
Exactly.
pack player.
correct, like,
Yeah.
you don't, but everyone's like that, you don't have to necessarily be the person,
100%.
but you know the person who knows the person, so it's about why are you on this podcast, so like, you may go to,
Okay, what about paying? I'm sorry, because you
Yeah,
said
yeah,
something
yeah,
because I just offered for a guest that's coming next in a couple weeks to pay
be on
Rescind
yours?
the offer,
No,
rescind it.
to pay for their hotel. They're coming from the East Coast, and I said, hey, I'll pay for your hotel.
So that's a little different, I think, if you're helping them, but also like depending on how big your guest is and how good your relationship is, if this was not being recorded and it didn't leave this room, I would say to you,
Okay.
no, I know, but I'm saying to you in a safe space, okay? You should be starting with your heaviest hitters, your closest relationships, and preferably ones with a little deeper pockets, and they should pay their own way to support you to do that, and the favor will be returned. Period, end of story. Otherwise, you better find someone to give you a badass new heights. We film it digitally, and I know visual's a thing, but to your point, like, no.
Most of the,
Honestly,
like,
I think the hospitality
Oh.
people out, it's like that.
It's
most
not-
of
you're
the
not gonna
really
make-
fancy pack guests that are not players. Okay, they're all my friends.
Yeah, like, you just do it,
Work
it
it.
comes back.
They're doing it off the strength of the relationship.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
I
And
think
then-
that's
and
what you really have to leverage.
And by the way, also the passion for what it is.
Yes,
Exactly.
which is why I said the why, right, which is not the money, and I think that's just,
I mean, he got the founder of Therabody tomorrow. The guy's so
Jason.
fucking awesome.
Yeah, Jason Worsham.
That was okay. So you're just working it.
yeah.
It sounds like there's some similarities. Like,
And I think,
Very much.
even when you said it about the branding, right, about organic, it's very similar to how you do player marketing when y'all were playing, right? And it's a little different and it shifted. Same thing with NIL though. Like, if you stick with your core values, to go back to a pack situation, don't rep products you don't support. Now, it might not be your favorite product. Like, you want to pick Smart Water over Dasani, like, whatever. But, like, if it's a product you don't support, don't do it. If it's a cause you don't care about, don't do it. When I used to teach about branding, you look in your house, like, what are all the things you have in your house? Start with those brands to go to first, and it's the same with podcast guests. Go to the people that you have the deepest relationships with, that you can build upon, and go to them first and do it. Then other people will want to get involved, especially when it's bigger. Like, and I don't know Jamil from before, but like, he posted something on social that was like, hey, I'm looking for this person, you know, can you find one for me? And like, anyway.
we got 5 minutes.
Okay, I got one other question.
I think he has.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go.
Go ahead.
All right, did you say you
So,
want to go back?
Raise that question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Obviously, I'm not a podcast. I watch a lot of podcasts. I always wonder, like, what are like the logistics of running like a single episode, and also how much studying / research do you do before you know? I guess in our field, you say you're game ready for an episode. So.
Yeah. So as far as logistics, right? I think there's multiple layers to it, right? It's one, coordinating the guests that you want to have on, right? I would say that's step one in the process, and that's just the actual episode itself, right? So it's getting the guest, doing research on the guest. I mean, sometimes there's already enough of a connection point there, so you already know enough about them to be able to ask the right questions. Depends like what your angle is on the show too. So it's like, you know, you might do a little bit about the guests and tell their story, but you know, you're your segment is about wellness or health, right? So you're asking them really health-oriented questions and fitness-oriented questions. So it's really like understanding what the theme is of your show so that you can ask them the right questions based off of that specific person, right? And making sure that that guest matches, that they can answer questions around that specific topic, right? You know, for example, like one of our shows is sports related, but another one is maybe more mental health focused, right? So we're going to get two different, like I could have the same guest on both of those shows, but the type of dialogue we're going to have is going to be very different just because of the basis of what the theme is of that specific show. So I would say you have to know the guest, but come up with like a list of questions beforehand that not necessarily you hit every single one of those, right? But at least you know in your head what are the talking points and the themes of the conversations that you want to hit. And that way you can also create a flow in your mind, right? Because I would say one of the biggest challenges being a host of a show is like you gotta listen, you gotta engage in the dialogue, but not only that, you gotta keep the flow of the conversation going so that it's flowing, right? And it's moving and it's not stagnant and there's not a lot of like so.
By the way, I got that wrong. So you guys don't have another deep dive. I have the venture capital.
Yeah,
I'd much rather stay here.
Okay.
We're chilling for a bit.
So you guys are fine.
Do you believe in this cyclical run of show then? Like, do you use a similar run of show model from guest to guest, or do you feel like it doesn't matter if you have a similar? So like, so you said have the flow, right? Like an idea, like to me that's called run of show. So you have like your intro, you have like your meat, and you have a closing. But in the meat part, do you believe in having from episode to episode like some similarities in like between guest to guest of like what you're talking about? Or it doesn't matter.
I think that's like the discretion of the person hosting the show. I don't think there's like a one size fits all. I think it goes back to like more of like what the theme of that show is and just making sure that you're true. Thank you. Staying true to that part of your show and who your identity is, right? And I think that goes back to identity, right? It's like you got to have an identity with this, right? Because if not, then it's like people are going to tune in and maybe want to listen to the person, but they're not going to really understand what the basis of the show is, right? So I think when you talk about the meat of it, I think you have to find what that identity is. But a lot of times too, you don't know where this guest is going to go with the conversation, right? And I'm a huge believer, and this is just, again, personal opinion. You could take it as you let it go where it flows, right? If there's certain points of conversations you want to hit, make sure you hit them, but you really never know where the dialogue is going to go. And if you force it to go in another way, it's going to be like, well, wait a minute, this guy was just talking about this, and now all of a sudden you're trying to turn the conversation over here. So it's like really let the guest dictate the conversation as far as like what they want to say and how they want to say it. And you're just kind of like the moderator of that conversation, but also keeping in the back of your mind, well, okay, they're making a point around, their mental health, right? And their journey or some of the adversity that they felt in their life. Well, I'm going to ask you the question in a way where you choose to answer it however you want. I may know it's a sensitive subject, right? We just had Eric Spoelstra's ex-wife on the show, Nikki Spoelstra, on the podcast. Oh, it was a good one.
Really
it was
good
cool.
Episode.
No, that was the Stay Tranquilo one.
Yeah. Nikki Spoelstra.
And so
she liked our podcast. She was a fan of the podcast, and he reached out to her, and she got on.
Yeah, and the dropping of the timing of that episode was also crazy because of the whole Hymus thing was going on. Yeah, so whatever. But I use her as an example, right? Because she had struggled with alcoholism, right? And it's been transparent, it's out there, but I don't know how much she's willing to say or how much she wants to talk about it or how she wants to talk about it. So I positioned the question in a way, it's like, hey, you've dealt with certain challenges in the last few years. What's kind of the way that you've approached those hurdles in your life, right? And crying.
He was even more vague than that. He's like, how are the last 4-6 years of your life?
Yeah, of your life been, yeah.
And she just was super open about it.
Crying on the podcast, like real emotion, real tears. Like I started fucking tearing up on the pod because it was deep, like son had cancer, alcoholism, divorce, like all these different things, right? But I used that as an opportunity for her to say, this is my story, right? And then from there, I'm now able to pick off because I knew how much she was able to say. Now we can get into a little bit more deeper about what she wanted to say about that, right? So that's when I say let the guests really lead the conversation. It's going to allow them to say what they want to say. And then from there, if they don't want to say much, then that's where you have to come in and really be like, all right, this is my turn to take the conversation over and really let people talk.
I have a question. I wanted to ask, sorry, if you could go back in time. I want to start a podcast talking to like moms, and specifically like in the demographic of transitioning from that early motherhood stage, and they're going into like entrepreneurship. They're doing like a lot of self-development, things like that, breaking a lot of like inner child stuff, kind of multifaceted, but that's very much my demographic. Thank you. And I make a lot of content, so I'm a content creator on Instagram, and I feel like that's already my demographic. And so I feel like I understand the podcast portion, but I would like to know if you had any advice, if you had to start all over, right? And just knowing the pain points that come with that, budget and all of that.
Yeah.
What would you say for setup, and then how to funnel using Instagram clips and stories to drive that conversion over to YouTube or whatever platform it might be?
Yeah, I would say, over, the last few years, like I wouldn't say regret, but I guess biggest regret I had was when I was at the marketing agency, not being more consistent with getting content out there on the podcast. I think that was like a big missed opportunity of like, just like a big gap in a way of like losing audience in that approach, So I would say like just the consistency was something that we do very good now, but kind of was like a fluctuation kind of thing. And those things happen just based off of you don't have time and you don't have the resources and you're busy with other things, right? But I would say don't let that be an excuse, right? Find a way, even if it's repurposing a clip from another episode because you couldn't get an episode out that week, but at least you're still relevant to get something out that week. And you could still drive people to that clip, maybe because they didn't see it the first time, right? Or a different iteration of that clip. Yeah, short form, yeah. And then, as far as the long form stuff, like, and driving traffic to the podcast, it's a challenge, right? Because just because you drove, X amount of views to a social media clip and, it did really well, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go and consume the long form, right? And I think that is really the hardest part, and why we've made more of an emphasis on just focusing so much on the short form clips, and why video has been so important, because it's our marketing tool for everything that we do, right? So even if it's just you on your phone and just announcing that a podcast is coming out this week, do that, right? If it's just extracting a clip, really easy. I mean, there's a tool, I forget the name of it, but you can upload a full podcast episode and it'll split up like 20 clips for you in a really, easy and seamless way. And then you can go in there, add the captions and all that. So if you can use those type of tools so that, for the sake of time, bandwidth and all that, at least now you have content that you can use and you can put out 2 or 3 pieces of content. And there's where like the residual will be built, right? Because that's what it's been. It hasn't been like a here to here, It's been like a here to here to here to here to here.
I always tell them, this long we've been working
and
together
then
for about
maybe
3 years.
maybe here, and then here, right?
You have to enjoy the small victories for sure.
Yeah.
Small victories are huge.
It's really been that.
Cadence that you've seen as far as posting that works well, just like across the board, like once a week video?
I mean, for the most part, we're posting almost every single day from all our different content offerings. I mean, one thing that he says, and it's been a word that we always use, is we've been consistent for the last 3 years with content. We haven't missed a week. Every single day, we're pretty much posting.
On the
But that's for different ones, right?
Yeah.
So if she was doing one, because
Like
you're
an
putting so
episode.
many,
Yeah.
right?
So what cadence for episodes as far, is it like once a week and then you chop it
For,
up?
for
and
the
you
short form or just episodes in general?
Like long form, like the full
Okay.
interview.
So like, to be transparent, just because of the logistics that go into producing an episode, guests, cutting up clips, all that, I think a great starting point is bi-weekly to a month. I think that is a great way to start, every other week to once a month, right? And I always use this as an example too with podcasts, right? If you can record one podcast a month, right? Let's say that's 12 episodes throughout the whole year. That one podcast though can turn into 10, 15 clips that you can use for social that will then drive audience to the long form stuff. And if they see 4 or 5 clips over the course of that month, you're still driving the traffic to the long form, and you might have driven maybe a couple hundred views or downloads through that because you pushed that one specific. Whereas you're not the biggest podcast in the world, right? So to get an audience engaged week over week over week with new guests over new guests with new guests, yeah, you might get someone to consume that new guest and they might be intrigued by that person. So you might get them to listen to that. But realistically, it's hard to get continuous audience week over week. So why not just drive that one podcast for a month long and just use social media as an avenue? And
To get people at different points.
exactly. And maybe they weren't on their phone that Tuesday that you posted that clip, so you get them the next week on another clip that, and maybe that clip performs better than that one. So,
And also with analytics, you kind
You
of know
stretch
at
the
what
content
point
out.
and what days work best for each type of content offering. So
Yeah.
like, there's some days that golf does better. Some days our main podcast does better, or sports does better. Like analytics will tell you at what point each kind of demographic is consuming their
But I mean, does it cannibalize?
So it's a great point, and I was actually about to talk on that, right? So one of our biggest challenges, like at this point, right, is we have 6 different podcasts that we produce within the network, right? So a different day has a different podcast that goes out, right? So like Tuesdays, Stay Tranquilo. Wednesdays usually our golf stuff. Thursdays is sports, like our local sports show, and Breaking House Rules, which is the one with Javon, and that one is like a fucking. You got like 3 clips that are going out in the same day, right? So it's like, how much of this is it getting diluted, right? And the algorithm is not going to necessarily reward you for putting out so much content out in one day, right? So then now you're actually hurting yourself versus helping yourself. And we're at the point where it's like, okay, how do we all maybe scale this back a little bit, focus more on like the quality of these 1-2 reels that we put out there, and then maybe not do so many of the long form, because it's like, hey, yeah, we're getting great engagement on the short form, but it's not translating into the long form. So there's a ton of investment and time that goes into producing one episode. Let's just focus on the social component. And I think something that's interesting too, right? I was sitting in a panel about a year ago, and the head of marketing for Walt Disney Company said something really interesting, and it honestly shifted the whole way that I thought about not only like just podcasts, but just like media as a general, right? And she said that social media in itself is a network, right? It's comparable to TV at this point because of how much money is being spent on social media advertising, that how many views are on there, how many eyeballs on there, users, all that. It's the equivalent to a TV network at this point. It's a Fox, a CBS, all that. So if you can just drive a ton of viewership through social content, you have now a product that you can monetize, right? You might only be getting 250, 20 listeners on your podcast, whatever that number may be, but you're driving 20,000 views per reel that you post on social media. Someone's going to see a ton of value in that. It's like, all right, you're driving eyeballs. You're driving millions of views, every month just through your social media clips.
Are you saying that it doesn't matter if you're getting the eyeballs on IG or TikTok
Right.
versus YouTube? Like,
I think
you're getting the eyeballs.
it's not that it doesn't matter. Exactly. I think there's still a ton of value in the fact that if you do a good job of doing social well, you're going to be able to build audience over time, right? Because if I'm driving continuously 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 views on social per clip, there's weight to that. And guess what? Now that person saw that clip, they engaged with it, they liked it. They probably now have more of a likelihood of consuming your next one. And now there's a level of interest there that now they're going to go and watch the long form, right? Because not everyone's going to make the commitment to watch a 50-minute, hour-long podcast, right? There's a select few, and there's an audience there for sure because we see it. But if you could focus on the social component first and really drive down the narrative of building social first and letting audience build residual over time, but focus more on like, hey, let's just make sure that we're active on social media and putting up clips frequently, 30, 40-second, minute-long clips, and you're driving viewership there, you're building something tangible that now you could go to market with and try to monetize instead of investing so much time in putting a full podcast out every single week.
Is that the sweet spot, by the way, like an hour?
No, I was actually gonna ask.
Yeah.
I think like 40. But
I-
for long form, I mean. Like,
Yeah.
If you're gonna chop up into a whole bunch of clips, I don't really think there is a.
I would say in the beginning, don't really focus too much on the time,
Yeah.
right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, 30 listeners are your 30 listeners. It is what it is, right? But I think you're gonna build audience over time, and then as you see you put more content, you're like, hey, we're driving more traffic to the YouTube, we're driving more traffic to the Spotify's of the world. They're only listening to 18 minutes of the conversation. Maybe we don't need to do an hour-long conversation. So how can we condense those conversations? So I think that's something you could tweak as you go. it is kind of honestly hard to maybe host a podcast in 20 minutes because I don't know how much really you can get out of that, you know? So I think 40 minutes, like even just me sitting on a podcast and talking, 40 minutes feels right too, right?
Yeah.
Like it just feels like I'm
Yeah,
like,
you're not
it's
exhausted.
not dragging out.
I would love to hear from everybody else because I know for me, like some of the ones that that I would be interested in, I just don't watch those podcasts because I get the clips on social,
Right.
And I feel like, oh, okay, I got it, and then I might see a different version of it, and I'll watch it in 30 seconds or a minute,
exactly.
and it doesn't inspire me to stop everything I'm doing because I
So
got I saw, I saw a little bit of that.
Which kind of like emphasizes what I'm saying, like do social, focus on it. And the beauty of podcasts is you can get so much content out of that, right? Instead of like sitting down and recording yourself talking and trying to create a social content, by you just sitting in a 40-minute podcast set, you're able to get, there's probably so much good stuff in there, right? So it's like record that hour-long episode and now all of a sudden you got 6 clips maybe that you could use for the month and you can cut them up and strategically, make them in a way that is engaging.
The logistics question
Yeah.
a little bit because I do think that like some of at first you're like I could do this, I can start it, and you're like yeah, all I gotta do is talk, but you don't realize that there's editing and there's buzzsprout. It's so much work. It's
No, for
time.
sure.
And so I'm also curious about. Obviously now you have an editing team, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, what does your editing process look like? Because sometimes that's the thing that'll defeat you, like, because you're like, do I put this whole thing out, or we recorded an hour, but really 40 minutes is good, so now I gotta cut it down, but now I gotta.
Right.
It's so like, talk to us a little bit about that.
So I'll let him answer like the editing of what that looks like now, but to do it like in the most simplistic way possible, without maybe having all the resources or having all the time in the world, I think, reality is you can use an iPhone. And exactly. So even if you don't have a camera, you can record on there. They have mics that connect to your phone. You can mic yourself up easily with with your iPhone. Just literally clip on mic, record on there, get the video, and all of a sudden you got audio and visual, right? And then from there, as far as like distribution, you want to get it on YouTube, you want to get it on Spotify, you want to get it on all these platforms. You can do that now easily using an Anchor, using a pod tracer, I think is another one. What's the one that you use? Buzzsprout, yeah. Right? So there's tons of platforms and then you just get that file, you upload it in there. You could schedule them ahead of time. So if you want to put the caption in there, say I want to drop this on Wednesday at 6 p.m., you put it in there and you put all the description of what the episode has and you put that in there and then boom, all of a sudden you recorded, dropped the episode on there and distributed it, relatively simply, right? And then there's a website there that cuts up social media reels too. So after it's uploaded onto YouTube, you can actually copy and paste the YouTube link, put it onto that website. I think it costs like $15 a month or something like that. And you put it on there and it'll cut up like 8 different reels with you with captions and everything. And then you could download and use it for social media. And then
know where to cut?
Their AI algorithm will find, yeah. It's a little dicey. You might get like 10 clips and like 6 of them are not great, but you can refresh it and have them cut up, another round of edits if you wanted to. And then you pick and choose, you look at the caption, see, and then if you want to do some extra editing, like on a CapCut or something like that, you could do that. But you can use those tools so at least you have content that you can use and it's the quickest way possible, right? And then as far as that, you get those posts and then you post them on Instagram, TikTok. YouTube Shorts is huge right now. We're seeing a lot of traction on YouTube Shorts. So if you could post on YouTube Shorts as well, I think that's a huge one.
What's the price if you'll pay for a video? Like, say if you don't want to do it on your own, what's the price you range?
To edit? I'll let him answer that question.
He's gonna give you Miami prices.
So y'all probably been working together.
No, for sure. I mean, look,
I'm just saying like.
I'll answer the question this way, right? I mean, obviously, video production and editing is expensive for the most part, right? Because you're paying for someone's equipment, quality of their work, all that. So travel, logistics, all that, right? So, but if just
for the turn that camera off, I'll tell you how much I'm
for the sake of editing, I mean, there's talented college kids that you can tap into that will do internships for you, especially guys like yourselves. You guys are high profile people with great reputations. People would die to work with you guys, you know? And then same, you're selling them on the fact like, hey, I'm building something cool, I'm building something unique, like work with me from the beginning and we can grow this together. I mean, when he first started, I wasn't paying him crap, you know? Like, and he's just believed in it from day one, and he's grown with us, and obviously now, you know, we all make a little money off of this, but the goal is like the selling the vision of it, right? And I think when you're in the beginning, you have to do that because you don't have funds to invest into editors, videographers, whatever it may be, right? So, and you want to keep as much money obviously in the business so you can continue to make it grow. So yeah, I answer the question that way because that's exactly how, you know, how to do it. And because there are people that are willing to, I don't want to call it free labor, but it's sweat equity is really what it is, right? And they're buying into the vision, they're buying into, you know, to working with guys like yourselves, and I think that's valuable in itself. And you know, it might work for 3 months and then you got to find the next one, right? Until someone really sees the vision and is willing to put in the time and the effort, and you guys just like working together, then I mean the sky's the limit. I would say honestly that's the best way to go about it. But you know, it could be guys charging $1,000 to, you know, edit a couple video clips, or you know, maybe even more if you hire like an agency. But that would be honestly the best way to go about it.
Do you, you said you do different topics
Mm-hmm.
days. Do you do that yourself, or do you find like have a team for every different topic?
Yeah, so I'm not on every show. I'm on about 3 of them. So I'm the host of the Stay Tranquilo one, which is the original podcast, and it's just usually me and a guest interviewing them. And then Breaking House Rules is me, Javon, and Cam, and it's just kind of like the 3 of us on a segment. And then the Tranquilo Sports, which is a local sports show that we just talk, Miami Sports, and that's just me and a co-host basically. And he kind of leads more of that effort. I just kind of sit on there, and sometimes I'm a floating guest. If we want to bring in someone else, they come in. So I'm not on everything. And as we've grown, I've kind of scaled myself out, because what I didn't want it to be was like the Andre brand, you know? I wanted to just, I'm here involved obviously, but you know, there's a multitude of other people that are also involved, and I want them to be the faces of the personalities for those shows.
Now my other question for that was, how do you go about seeking the talent that you would like to see?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, you know, it started off as friends, basically. You know, hey, we're guys with similar interests that want to maybe start something together. So, you know, started amongst your close-knit guys that have the same interests of maybe being on a show. That's where it starts. And then it's just kind of scaled out into, hey, I see you're already making content. You're maybe trying to monetize this content. We can help you through maybe some of our relationships, you know, scaling it out. We're doing the outreach, we're doing the production, so we can help you with your production, we can help you with your monetization, and you're already creating content, so why not come in and do content in partnership with us, right? Having some sort of connection point where they represent the brand in the right way, you know, they're not just out of left field and they have no connection to the brand at all. But if they have some sort of connection to the brand and the audience, then that's one, you know, kind of one criteria. But also if they're already creating content, it's great, because it's like, well, they've already kind of went through that hurdle where they don't, you know, it's awkward being a content creator for some people, right? So maybe they don't feel comfortable being on camera. So if they already have some sort of familiarity there, you know, then we'll reach out to them and say, hey, do you want to join the network, and kind of give our pitch if they have an existing podcast. But they have to also fit the mold of like what makes sense.
Can you speak to the IP of your brand? So for those people who are
Yeah.
starting, so like for example, there's some people that are starting up. I know, like, even if I never use mine again, like my name to my podcast is trademarked. So
Right.
like yours is trademarked, right?
Yeah.
So like
Trademark too.
can you speak a little bit to IP for people who maybe don't know, and like when that should be a thing for you, and how, you know,
Yeah,
I
it's
feel
tough.
It's Stay Tranquilo, it's trademarked.
It's trademarked, yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I was like, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say, like, if you're married to a name and you really think like, you know, there's weight to it in the long run, try to trademark it as soon as possible, because all it takes is one clip to go crazy, and then someone sees the vision of that and then they trademark it. Yeah, I wouldn't say there's like an exact time, because obviously a trademark is expensive, you know, so not everyone has, you know, the funds to be able to pay, you know, a couple $1,000s for a lawyer and going through that exercise of trademarking a product, right? But yeah, the earlier you can take care of that, and obviously registering the business, wherever that state may make sense for you, and filing for the trademark, do it as early as possible, because you want to own that property, and then that property itself has value too. So if you own the rights to it, if someone wants to tap into that name for whatever reason, you can monetize off of that, right? Like, so for us, the reason we actually trademarked the name was not even because of the podcast. And the podcast was around in the early stages, but we got approached by a beer brand that liked the name so much and wanted to use it as a tagline, and pays us royalties now for being able to use the name. And the only reason we were able to do that is because we owned, the rights to the name. So you never really know, what that ownership of that domain and that, username or whatever you want to call it looks like, because it could create other monetization opportunities through that.
And the domain is huge, like the web domain, if you want to have a website.
Yeah, and then owning the website, obviously.
Like,
even if you're not active on this, on the website, own it. And it's easy to make, nowadays it's relatively easy to make a website, right? And you go use a site like Wix or Shopify, whatever it might be. You could build it on GoDaddy, right? And you go there, they have templates that you could build, and you're there, you just put the content on there if you want to, or it's just as simple as subscribe to our newsletter. And then as it evolves, you can use it as your avenue to drive brand sponsorships, right? Because they're gonna go look at your portfolio and be like, oh, let me look up more information on these guys. Then you can create merch around your pod, right? And then that's another monetization strategy that you can have, because you have fans.
How do you track the analytics? If, like, you do get a sponsorship, for you to repeat that business with them? Are you getting codes and stuff like that? Like, how?
There's a couple different ways. I mean, we'll monitor social analytics for specific posts and just literally accumulate the numbers based off of what we did on social. We'll send them the full podcast audio, like if they're included in a podcast, we'll let them know, like, hey, and those 5 episodes that you guys are a part of, this is how many downloads were there. And then there are affiliate codes too that are starting to become more popular, so they get tracked a little bit better. And those aren't like the fairest way to track, because somebody could still have gone to your website and didn't use the code, and then all of a sudden you don't get credit for it, kind of thing. But yeah, I would say, just monitoring viewership through, social analytic tools, and then affiliate codes would probably be the other one.
I know you said last question, but
Yeah,
you said you do you record out of a studio.
We share a space with an artist named Vic Garcia, and we use his space as our studio, basically. And then we also float around too. So what do you mean? We'll be at a restaurant, we'll be at an office, we'll be in a backyard.
Pallet factory.
We'll kind of.
Pallet factory.
We've recorded in a car. Yeah.
My wife and I, we invest in real estate.
Okay.
And one thing that I've been looking into was commercial space. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Dude,
what are you looking
I
for?
think there's a massive opportunity in just content creation space, like creating a workspace plus content space. You're starting to see a couple of them pop up, but they're not either in great locations, they're expensive, or they're just not functional spaces, right? So like, well, obviously warehouse spaces have become big into this whole content space, because you can get huge into like how you can design the spaces. But I would say there's a massive opportunity specifically in Miami, because so many people are getting into the space but don't know where to go to create space, right? Like the Breaking House Rules one, we go all the way to Boca to do it, and like they're monetizing that space right now. I think they charged us like $5,000-$6,000 for the whole year, right? Or for like a season of episodes. I think it was like 30 episodes or whatever it was. And they were supposed to help with audio, video, all that. They could have, but it was terrible quality. The lighting was awful. Like the quality of the pod would have been terrible. And then that's when we came in and we're like, all right, fuck it, we're gonna do it ourselves.
What catches your eye, like the lighting?
Yeah, you got to get good lighting in there. You got to get good camera, soundproof walls, right? So if you can create a space that's like that say, hey, we're gonna get the best quality, best kind of sets, designs, all that, fluctuations. Like you can have one set today, another set tomorrow, right? So having a space where it's just I call it the creation station, right? Like where people can just go and create, I think could be cool, and making sure that you build the infrastructure for something like that. But I do think there's a big opportunity.